Скажите, пожалуйста.
Добрый день. Слышно ли меня? Видимо, слышно. Добрый день, уважаемые участники конференции.
Good afternoon, dear members of the conference. The organizers have asked me to moderate this round table. My name is Chubais, Anatoly Borisovich Chubais, Rosnano. The topic of this round table is 25 years of reform. And now I understand that it's 25 years of Russian reform. And that's a very worthy subject for discussion. We are not yet sure who is to speak today, as is often the case with scholars. And I understand it's a stellar list. Professor Yasin. Let me remind you that besides all of his scholarly accomplishments, when he was much younger, he was Minister of the Economy of the Russian Federation, which combined his fundamental scholarly knowledge and practical knowledge of how reforms are carried out. I wonder if I need to introduce Alexander Ozan. Now, presently, he is unexpectedly Dean of the Economics Department of Russia, Moscow State University. For me, he's one of those interesting people who is involved in scholarly research of institutional aspects of economic and social reforms, which is very close to me. And this trend of from economic determinism to institutional, social, cultural determinism is something that merits analysis and understanding. Yakov Urinson is Doctor of Economic Science and is also a person who was directly involved in Russian economic reforms. As Deputy Prime Minister, he was in charge of dozens of sectors, starting from defense industries to agro-industrial, agribusiness. And the time when he was heading the Russian agro-industrial complex, we had the top yield when he was minister. So now this record was broken, yeah, but at that time this was a national record. So the topic is 25 years of reforms. And when I was preparing myself for this round table, I recalled a saying, two most important modern people you meet is your predecessor or your successor. In that sense, I should say directly. That if I use this perspective from the historical perspective, quite often one sees that the colleagues that are now managing the country and governing the country often refer to the 90s, and the wild 90s is the catchword. Being testimony to one perspective on predecessors, but at the same time, honestly, those who were involved in the reforms of the 90s, when they look at current, present-day economic developments, they also see in a mirror-like fashion the way the 90s are perceived by some, I quoted. I think that today we need to elevate ourselves a little bit above. There have been so much debate and discussions, so much screaming around. I think time has come to turn over a new page and to try and take an objective and look what was done, what we failed to do. Now we can dare and praise ourselves and criticize ourselves. And speaking about the outcome of the 25 years of Russian reforms, we should not necessarily focus on political aspects, and we should focus to the maximum extent about the substance of this topic. Organizers have asked me to have three items discussed. Results of the reform of the market economy. The second thing, privatization, minus and pluses. The third item is the current situation, prospects for development. And also civil society and traditions of despotism. I removed this item. We shall do without civil society. I am in charge. Based on this, I would suggest we start with the first item, results of the reform of the market economy. Let me remind you, in November 91, there was no market economy in Russia. I remember that very well. My question is to you, do we have market economy now? Yes. Yes. Now everybody could hear it, yes. Please explain your point of view. Very simple justification. When I go shopping, and when I recall what I saw in shops when we had Soviet power in place and there was no market economy, and now I see such a stark contrast that there's been no debating. If you remember, we had Malyshev, Yuri Malyshev, our common friend, who was in charge of coal. And he had an argument in 96, in 97, and he was conducting a hard debate with us, not because he was against reforms, but his understanding of reforms was different. Mr. Kozhukovsky, who must be attending some breakout session at this conference, he almost killed him. They almost killed each other as they were debating, and one day they met at Smolensk supermarket, and he is living nearby, and I was there too. It was somehow in 2006, and he greeted me, he hugged me, and we walked along the counters in this supermarket, and we made a few steps together, and he said, you know, when I go into the supermarket, and I'm here quite often, I have an impression that you were right then. Again, when one discusses events in which people remember, I mean, living today, and who were involved or were were there and they have some personal opinion, not necessarily having any argument-based description. It's the moment one doesn't have any scientific or scholarly view or perspective. But I go back to that time, and then I look at the time that separates us from those times, today and those times. My impression that throughout this time, in many cases, the system that got established as the result of reforms of 91, 92, up until 97, I believe, this order and system that keeps saving Russia and is providing possibilities for its future, being a basis for Russia's development, future development. Do you need further scientific proof? No, we can so far take note. I will be ready and we can ask others to answer the same question. Yakov, market report. Do we have a market economy? Yakov Urinson, thank you. As was agreed with organizers, I'll try to be careful and diligent, rather, in presenting what I have. 25 years of economic reforms of modern Russia. These reforms show us the second slide. In a number of studies, you see the names of the authors. I don't want to repeat things which are common knowledge, and I want to dwell on what is important. And secondly, the issues that I myself dealt with personally. These are three stages in the transition to the market. Looking back, you can see these slides, stages, sorry. The first stage dismounted the planning and distribution system. There was privatization, the liberalization of prices and foreign economic activity. And this was accompanied with a very serious slump in production, very high level inflation and social cost. Many people sitting here remember when the prices were released and liberated in 91, the hope was the money mass would be controlled by the central bank, and it was assumed that we will not be printing money. There will be a one-off price hike and then it will stop. In life, it did not happen that way. And the companies consumed the working capital. They did not have access to loans because there were no commercial banks in place, so they were not able to. As a result, we saw barter and offsets, and they could not pay to the budget, and budget became a deficit budget, and privatization money could not come in to replenish this. The population did not have the money. The class of entrepreneurs was in the making, did not have the capital, and to sell it for a song was not reasonable. With regard to foreign investors, this was a closed option because the Supreme Soviet said we are not selling our motherland. Therefore, hence voucher privatization with all of its results. But the main goal, to create an effective owner, was resolved. And this ensured irreversibility of these market transformations. Alongside with institutional reform, early 90s saw this very formidable task from new state borders and border troops was reinstatement and reconstitution of a system of economic agencies and departments. These functions in Russia were performed by the Soviet Union departments and agencies. And my colleagues were entrusted with the task of having a viable and functional statistics committee because of the price stabilization and its outcome and dynamics of price dynamics in towns and cities and regions and rural areas were to be analyzed and presented. The very fact of inflation was denied in the Soviet Union. There was no statistics on price dynamic, but already in early 92, Yegor Gaidar, as acting prime minister, had the data on price dynamics in over 300 cities and towns and rural settlements. In 92, we had an experimental basis national accounts in place instead of the national economy balance that dominated this country's economy for over 70 years. In 94, the State Committee introduced this statistical accounts into national statistics. A few words about macroeconomic forecasting. In 92, the President of the government got options for calculations for decision-making, major decision-making, including analysis for allocations for defense and security. And this was discussed recently. After a hard debate, the defense-related government orders were reduced 4 to 5 times. This five-fold decrease in defense expenditures was not always correct, but time has shown that what we managed to do is to maintain the capacity of the key defense industries and enterprises, and Topol M was the outcome of this. The Severodvinsk nuclear submarine, and you can see the capabilities of this. It is these weapons that are shown in Red Square Parade, but they don't recall that they were created in those wild 90s. Another sector that was used budget financing was the coal industry. Next slide. The work of miners for many decades was hard and hazardous, and in the Soviet Union, per 1 million tons of coal mined, there was one perished miner, one casualty. Early 92, Yegor Gaidar formulated the essence of the coal reform, liquidation of obsolete and loss-making companies with targeted social support for miners. Now we can say that the reform of the coal industry was positive. The number of people employed went down and productivity was doubled. The number of casualties went down twofold, and the entire coal production was in private companies. All the deficiencies and wrong decisions of the 90s had to be paid for with high cost. I mean, the default of 98, when the state was unable to pay on its obligations, the ruble was devalued, and all hired labor, but the bulk of the population suffered. They lost most of their savings, and their current incomes were devalued, and many lost their jobs since the companies were closed.
Because they were bankrupt. Business community suffered. It lost a lot of property that it has received in the course of privatization. The economic effect from those unpleasant steps was significant. By the end of 1999, we saw economic growth, which continued for 10 years almost. Unfortunately, during this period of growth, it was not supported by structural reforms. This brought about the crisis of 2008, which was followed by a rebound, but then growth rates was lower and became negative, minus 3.8%, as you can see in this chart. That was the number for 2015. In conclusion of the Russian economic reforms overview of the last 25 years, I want to stress one point. The most significant reforms have taken place in 91 to 93. They were carried out in extreme conditions because the time for preparation of gradual reforms was wasted in 1990s. It was clear that prior to liberalization of prices in January 92, it would be appropriate to save resources for intervention in commodity markets. This could soften the unavoidable price shock. But what kind of accumulation of resources could we talk about when we saw the threat of hunger in big cities? The foreign exchange reserves amounted to $65 million. I stress that. And foreign debt amounted to $81 billion. Naturally, nobody would lend us money, and shiploads of grain that were coming our way were arrested in European and Canadian ports. The democratic state that was born in place of the Soviet Union in the first years of its existence was not built perfectly. The institutions were built quickly based on a gut feeling, and some mistakes were made. The most important of them was lack of systemic approach in state building. Many people were convinced, including myself, that reconstruction of the economy was a top priority and other things would change accordingly. But it turned out that it's impossible to modernize the country only through the economy. It's not enough to change the economic position. It's important that people also change the way they think. It's essential to change the old political system. Since day one, we should have been focused on the judicial reform and on law enforcement agencies reforms, as well as economic reforms. We have paid a very high price in 1993 when there was a serious threat of restoration of the communist regime in the second half of the 90s. And we also deviated from the main line of democratic development in the early 2000s. According to the Ministry of Economic Development, we can see economic growth by the end of next year. The World Bank and independent experts, Mr. Yasin, Mr. Vyugin, Mr. Nikolaev, believe that it would happen in 2018 at best. I stick to that opinion as well, and I can explain why. To get growth again, we have to add additional resources, or we have to launch systemic reforms. Yakov, can I interrupt you for a second? You are giving us a systemic overview of the formation of the market economy, and now you want to talk about the future. If I get you right, you want to talk about the possible trends for the future. I would ask you to stop at this point in time. Let's first look at the results, and then I would give you the floor again. Thank you very much. Now, that Mr. Orensan has spoken about this government work, and I have the next question. What do you think about the results, the outcomes of the market economy formation? Look at the kind of company that I find myself in. Three former ministers of the economy, former prime minister, a big businessman, and you're asking me to talk about the results of privatization and market reforms. Perspectives is no problem, but it's not an easy job that you're giving me. Anatoly, if you allow me, I would take my own angle at this. Look at what critics say, those who criticize the standpoints that Yakov Mikhailovich has just outlined. They say, what kind of market economy is it? A competitive environment is deteriorating. Monopolies are getting stronger. access to resources has been stopped. Administrative barriers are high. Transaction costs are high. It seems like nothing has worked out, or it has worked out, but very poorly. I stick to a different opinion. I think that the reforms that you have carried out, gentlemen, have addressed a different task, not creating a market economy, a market system, rather a more difficult problem for the population of Russia and the Soviet Union. It was not a transition from an authoritarian regime, from a plant-based economy to a democratic state and a market economy, in which case we would have to say that nothing has worked out. It was a transition from a deficit economy to the consumer society. Look at the Soviet Union. At the peak of its development, of our home country in 1960s. We were leaders in space exploration, in nuclear power production. We had great cases of success in culture, but it was based on the economy of deficit. We could not provide for our own people. And this economy of deficit, not the totalitarian regime, but the economy of deficit was killing the great empire, and it killed it. And then the dynamic of political regimes, if we are to talk about government institutions, was determined by whether they were getting problems resolved or not. How much support did Mikhail Gorbachev get? He opened access to whatever he could give access to, literature, information, and that lasted a couple of years. Shock reforms that were launched by Yeltsin and Gaidar government were very hard. They were very painful, but they enjoyed the support because the deficit problem was no longer there. And all other steps, including the things that happened when Mr. Putin was the president, was expansion of the same thing. Mobile communications, supermarkets were spreading out and rolling out to faraway places. By the time of 2008-2009 crisis, Russia has replaced the deficit-based economy with a consumption society. Does it have proper market mechanisms? No. We have seen a bifurcation point in 2003. At that time, on the one hand, we saw structural reforms launched by Graph, and they were producing results. And on the other hand, hydrocarbons prices soared. And we have seen what had happened 50 years before, when instead of hard Kosygin reforms, they selected another path, that is to develop somewhat lower oil fields. And I am afraid we have great institutions which are focused on using rent. They're great at it, all kinds of rent, monopoly, administrative, and other kinds. They are not giving us any type of development, though. They are a different kind of organization. Hail to the reforms that have addressed a great economic challenge. We have performed a unprecedented transformation from the deficit society to the consumption society with all various attributes which you don't see in many other situations. However, have we addressed the task of building market economy with investment mechanisms, with investment models? No, we have not. And the charts that Mr. Yurinson is showing us tell us that as soon as we have used up the commodity cushion, the economy began to dive nose first. it's just hibernating. Now we're going to talk about the future. I think we are starting our conversation from the conversation about the past. Let's forget about privatization for now. If Mr. Chubais says forget privatization for now, how can I object? Colleagues, I think this is a big and significant process, but it's a different kind of process. And today we have resolved a deficit problem. However, we have not made any steps in the path of development. Thank you, Alexander. This is a perpendicular or orthogonal view by Alexander Auzan. And now I would invite yet another panelist, Professor Treisman from the University of California, to give us his view, his objective, his independent as an observer. Many of us are familiar with Professor Treisman's works on the labor market and on the political economy. There's a number of works that have to do with the problem of alcoholism and drinking, which I am very interested in, but we will leave that till later. Now, Mr. Treisman, would you give us a quick overview of the subject of the results of market reform in Russia? I apologize, I will speak English.
Has the market economy formed in Russia? The answer is yes, of course. There are different kinds of market economies. There are more efficient ones, less efficient ones. Russia's is certainly not the most efficient, but it is a market economy. So the question is that a good or a bad thing? We hear a lot of complaints about the defects of the market economy. So let's agree that the market economy is the worst system except for all the others. The market creates inequality, it creates insecurity, but still, if we look around the world at the alternatives, countries which after 1991 didn't move towards the market economy, Cuba, North Korea, they're not very attractive models. Now, those countries that were communist before 1989 and that did move to the market, those that moved the fastest to the market have done the best. They have the best economic performance these days. In Russia, some aspects of market reforms were faster, some were slower. And of course, there were remaining problems that need to be solved. The most important has been mentioned already by Mr. Urenson. The problems of the court system, law enforcement, and so what's urgently needed is, as many people recognize, is an independent, professional court system and defense of property rights. And there was some positive movement in that direction, at least in the arbitrage courts for some time, but we see that positive developments in this sphere have been undercut in recent years, well, for quite a number of years now, by political interventions. So I think that's the real challenge going forward.
Спасибо, спасибо.
Thank you. Thank you. I would like Dmitry Zimin, who is with us tonight, to join us. You know Dmitry as one of the leaders of Russian business, and he is also very known in the charity world. But you may not know that Dmitry is one of the leading experts since the Soviet time in electronics and IT. Dmitry, reforms have been conducted with you playing a big role. You are the subject of that reform. What do you think about the outcomes? I wanted to speak in a different way. I was listening to all others, and I thought that I cannot help saying it about 1990s. Several dozens and several hundreds of my colleagues in those decades, 1991 to 2001, those are the happiest years of my life. when people speak disrespectfully about 1990s, I disagree. Those were the happiest years of my life. Before that, I have spent 30 years in one of the most privileged research organizations under the defense industry. I was a deputy general designer, and I remember the time when we were not getting wages, and at that time, Vimpelcom was put together. This was a company that, after a few years, became the first Russian company to do an IPO at New York Stock Exchange. In this context, I want to remember a few things which are not related to one another. Vimpelcom has been created. What kind of money was used in the beginning? The main source of money was loans, unsecured loans from suppliers, Ericsson, Alcatel. And looking at the relations with those companies, our trip, a roadshow to the United States, colleagues, you will be envious. I don't know at what other time Russians were getting such a hot welcome. Everybody was so excited to see people from Russia, from Moscow. This trust, this sympathy turned into millions of dollars of loans. People from Moscow, people from Russia, Gorbachev, Yeltsin, those words opened every door. That warm feeling, that warm attitude never came back. Number two. And I have spent 30 years working for defense industry. The work was professionally interesting and challenging, but that military or defense industry was so inefficient. The priority of secrecy and confidentiality and total control dominated over performance and efficiency, and that makes me conclude that if we were to create cellular communications in the defense industry, and we were using the same buildings, by the way, I think we would not have mobile communications for many years. Secrecy was everywhere, and when it happens, it has a lot of negative consequences. And the final point, I was head of a department, I was deputy to the general designer of the institute, and then I was given a new position. I was responsible for conversion programs. This was a fashionable, popular concept in those days. I had a limited experience then, and I realized that it was not possible. We were working in the same facility, but we had to build a different organization. We had to build a different company, and that's how Vimpelcom was incorporated. I don't have much time. I just want to say, I want to brag of it. You see a representative of the group of people who found 1990s to be the happiest and most productive years of their lives. Thank you very much to the 1990s, and thank you to those people who were behind the creation of the new Russia, including those who are present here, who allowed us to spend 10 years, not such a long time, living in the environment of creativity and production happiness. Something that just came to my mind, one episode, we had these food shortages at that time, and Wimpelcom was a very successful company, and we celebrated a new record number of subscribers, 5,000 mobile subscribers, and we hired a ship, and we were on that riverboat on the Moscow River. People were having snacks and lots of food, and one of our employees came over and asked me to give a discount. This was a young man, and he said, you know, I have the first job where I do not have to steal from the company. And I really appreciated that. Thank you very much to many people who are here and to those who are not with us any longer, including Mr. Gaidar. Thank you for this miracle that gave us an opportunity after having worked for many years in a privileged defense company to create one of the most successful and effective market economy companies, the first company that did an IPO at New York Stock Exchange.
Question to you. Listening to what you were saying, I understand you're not typical representative of the military-industrial complex. You're rather an exception than the rule. Look at the entire military-industrial complex, defense complex, one of the most developed sectors today of the Russian economy. And the Russian defense complex, in my view, is one of the few sectors that has nothing to do with commodities and works meeting world standards in price and quality. $14 billion are the number one in terms of exports, in the second is agriculture. If you look at the history of the defense complex for this past 25 years, evidently the most difficult catastrophic decline in the 90s, and then a very slow and difficult climb to today's parameters. Yours is an entirely different history. Instead of the slump, you overnight became a creator of a sector that had not pre-existed, which was created in the 90s, called communications. And Russian users do not remember what it took to call St. Pete from Moscow. Can I book a call? Yeah, Friday, 5 to 9 p.m. That was the way it started. Then the question is, why did it so happen that in your sector of the defense sector, the dynamic in this 25 years is radically different from the dynamic in other sectors of the defense sector? It is for 25 years I'm outside of this. Of course, I have friends, they're working, I'm outside of the defense complex, and I cannot speak for the entire defense complex, but it appears that everything related to radio electronics, I do have big doubts that that part of the defense complex related to radio electronics is at the peak of scientific and technical progress, or state of art, as we would say. Yeah, such products, it's hard to produce purely military hardware. For instance, microcircuits. To develop a microscope requires a huge effort. And it's economically good when it is replicated in millions and millions of civilian products to create something purely for military purposes. Yeah, very much behind life. At that time, what I was saying was true. It was very uneconomical and not impossible. And in the Soviet Union, the household electronics like and computers, television sets were not in abound supply. Or when 25 years ago, what we had in the defense complex, we did not have high quality. Did it change for the better much? I'm not ready to discuss it in public anyway. Thank you.
Ну вот все-таки тут
Thank you. This is about, yeah, privatization is in my shopping list in my instructions, and we had to discuss it. Dr. Auzan began saying, so I will keep mum, and you have the floor, Alexander. Yeah, I think Yakov Urinson began to discuss privatization. In Alice in Wonderland, yeah, it's getting more and more dangerous. Now we'll discuss privatization with Chubais. No, I'm not going to discuss it. I'm going to listen. I believe that if one assess privatization as a many years long project with long-range results, what are the strengths and what are the positive outcomes and what are the problems that have been inherited from a privatization? If one look at the evolution in Soviet times, which was ongoing in the Soviet Union, we understand that there was ownership of military-related complexes by managers happened in the Soviet time. There were administrative markets emerging, and there are studies concerning that. If we understand that the country was moving from one state to another, and what is a criterion for its movement in the right direction? In my view, the less blood and violence, the more correct the transformation is. So one had to rely on tendencies in place to move to another stage. The strength of the privatization that occurred was the continuation of the trend that already took shape and emerged rather in the Soviet Union, and that showed the way to the path to ownership and allowed previous groups to implement their plans alongside with new groups. So socially, politically point of view, it's a successful project. That's social political part. With regard to the economic part, let me respond to what was said about the effective owner. Economically speaking, already in early 90s, we did not know that, of course, but already the Coase had gotten Nobel Prize for his understanding. But according to Coase, if you have positive transaction costs, they're always positive, then automatically you cannot have, based on the results of the distribution of assets, you cannot achieve para-optimal growth. It's also when there are zero transaction costs. Yeah, the income does not affect the quality and correctness of decision makers. The friction, the force of friction from the structure of economic and non-existing institutions that generated high transaction costs did not allow to achieve effective for organizations. There were only exceptions. We still have problems dating back to those times when we have weak institutions. Corporate governance looks completely different from a strong governing system. Huge blocking stakes. Management is contained and restricted and restrained in its actions. Absence of serious instruments for company control. Why? If you are not protected in this way or another way, if there is no institutional milieu in environment, that is done through the method I mentioned. I think we will now come across this and face this issue when? That's our generation of those who are 60 plus, managing the country and companies are now. And that's about yeah, I will probably work for another 30 years or so, but I do understand that when you have not only grown-up children, but also grandchildren that do understand, there's a problem of inheritance. We'll have problems with this inherited corporate structure because it took shape when it took shape. I understand you're using me as the devil's advocate, Anatoly, in this discussion. And who is the devil? I will think about the customer, yes, for me, my presentation and my contribution. In summary, the privatization as a project, as a long-term project, no doubt had that positive result in the sense that the country went through it without a civil war. Economically speaking, privatization had far less significant consequences, more complex consequences, because it did not produce efficiency in these circumstances, and there were outstanding issues with regard to corporate governance, and we have to deal with this in our subsequent stage. But history works like this always. Why not?
Of course, you get the achievements from the past, and you also get the new challenges and tasks. Okay, we've taken care of privatization. Let's move on. We have yet another issue of the current situation and development prospects. Yakov Moisevich started talking about it, and now I will pass the floor over to you again. Please share your vision. Can we have chart 10 of my presentation? That's it. I talked about sources for economic growth in the current situation. There may be two, either additional resources or structural reforms, or a combination of both. Today, it's clear that for objective reasons, for demographic reasons, we don't have extra labor resources, and until 2050, we won't have it. Natural resources at an acceptable price will also not be available. Going north to get such resources would be associated with very high price, both economic and political. We don't want to build new cities in the north using prisoners' labor. So structural reforms remain the only option. Mr. Auzon talked about it, and I am talking about it too. New privatization in the last 10 to 15 years in mineral resources production and in other industries. We have seen active deprivatization process. That is, several private companies have been passed over to the government hands, like Gazprom and Rosneft. Some property has been taken away from Khodorkovsky or Yevtushenkov, and the share of public property at different levels has grown from 30 to over 50%. That certainly has been accompanied by the lower efficiency of the economy. New privatization is essential. However, this is a very challenging step politically in the current situation.
The next area I would like to dwell on is the military reform. It's not just a mere reduction of the armed forces, but modernization and both the hardware and the personnel. Serdyukov tried to move forward, but we are where we used to be. Unfortunately, many other important reforms were never started or got stuck. The question is why? And given our historical experience, let me respond. I'm as an old man, and I remember Kosygin reform, transition from physical to value indicators. Medvedev reform is closer to us in time. Medvedev's demonstration, both. Neither reform produced desired results. And the major reason is because there were no political conditions behind them to back them. The same applies to the structural reforms that are on today's agenda. The entire experience of the world civilization shows lack of competition leads to stagnation, but there is no economic competition without political competition. Therefore, successful transformation in today's economy require democratization of the entire public life. We need a working, functional parliament and not a simulation of it. We need a multi-party system and not managed but real elections. Another aspect which is important, today's technical progress require not mammoth and cumbersome awkward companies, but small and medium-sized companies who are agile enough to respond to requirements of the time. And in this new reality, it's not the defense complex with the dominating government ownership that generates innovations, but the civilian sector that from which innovations trickled into the defense sector. And the structural issues are becoming more and more acute. And we see the dangerous dependence of the economy from the commodity, from the oil and gas sector. We see that the technological backwardness, we are more and more lagging behind technologically from developed countries. We see efficiency going down. The major factor behind this unfavorable tendency is brakes put on institutional reforms and high transaction costs mentioned by Dr. Auzan. Entrepreneurs, instead of innovations, they need to bribe officials and please force structures. We have natural resources second to none. We have a great market, eighth in the world, but high institutional barriers put our somewhere after 70th place, and we have a lot of a big share of the population is poor. People and capital, we see people in capital flight. And there are many high-skilled specialists that are leaving the country, and quite often people coming in, they have no professional skills, even basic education. With regard to capital flight in 2014, sorry, it was higher than ever before throughout the 17 years. There are several crossroads that we will have to move through comparable to what we faced in early 20th century. As Evgeny Yashin wrote in the 80s, Gorbachev got rid of empire and embarked on democratization. Yeltsin got rid of the administrative system and went into market reforms. In the 2000s, Putin built a bureaucratic vertical. Now there is a choice. Either we move by inertia or embark on a decisive democratization of the system. The inertia-related scenarios will lead us to an impasse. What we need is a decisive democratization, and it's a three-pronged attack. It's politics, institutions, and the economy. The first thing is the political system, and what we need to do is to move from paternalism to social partnership. For this, we need some kind of a social contract, like Spaniards had in the 70s, the Moncloa Pact in the 70s of last year. The second thing is institutional modernizations. The essence of institutional reform, and I will agree with what Auzan had to say, is quite clear to us, and much is being said recently, but unfortunately so little is being done. And the third area of attack is economic modernization. In the past fourth of last century, early this century, we see food prices going up, particularly animal proteins, as well as hydrocarbon prices, oil and gas, and thereby market signaling to the world community that the demand for those is exceeding so much the supply. And initially the signals were understood, and leading scholars of the world in the limits of growth study, they are graphically describing this. But in real life, additional incomes and windfalls were used not to produce high-tech, but to expand the area of consumption. And gradually, the world community is recognizing the danger of this gap and separation of demand from technological process. Today, production of shale gas from becoming a reality is no longer a myth, and we see more investment into renewables, water, sun, geothermal. There's an active search for new solutions in food supply. FAO estimate is that the world will have 9 billion people in 2050. To feed these people, it will have to increase food production by 70% compared to 2005. In today's world, the rate of economic growth will depend not on involving additional material resources, but in intellectual technologies, on a fuller use of human capital. Earlier, in the past several centuries, economic growth was generated by the real economy, and we saw technical progress in metallurgy, agriculture, energy, and power sector. Today, the drivers of economic growth are science, education, IT, bio, and nanotechnologies. The transition to a new model of functional is a non-trivial task for any economy. In Russia, it is going to be even more challenging because of the resource orientation of today's economy in Russia. Great doubts are generated by the ability of the vertical of power to timely respond to this changing situation. The reforms is a serious, the necessity of reforms is a conclusion of this. We have questions. Time for questions. Listening to Yakov Yurinson, I came up with this question to Auzan. A kind of a provocative question, but very sincere. Yurinson says Kosygin reform was not completely accomplished and was not complete, not completed. I want to expand the historical horizon, look into the future and look into the past, and ask myself about Stolypin reform. It's a kind of some integrated reform. Stolypin reform succeeded only partially, was not completed, and the fundamental steps are disbanding the община, the community, introduce changes, but not radically. And the reforms of the 90s were not totally successful. And the question is why. Now, Orinson says, what is to be done? He says we should carry out reforms. No, Stupilian reform eventually failed. Later reforms eventually failed. And then Orinson says we need another reform. Maybe we should not go into those reforms. Excellent question. Thank you. Then it will be easier for me to express my conviction and my idea. It took me quite a long time to arrive at.
Most probably we will have reforms. I don't know how soon, and most likely they will be not very successful. I keep saying, I have a friend, he is a biologist. He says, on our gravestones, people will write the following. They were confused but sincere. We will act, and then others will say that we were wrong. Today, there's popular thinking that it's all about institutions, and if we develop good institutions, we'll be in great shape. But look at this. Institutions, as is recognized by the research of last 10 years, and I can refer to Mr. Robinson about inclusive institutions and other things. All these are new things. Last year, I have received a book from Dorona Sameglu we have had an interesting debate in Astana. Sameglu and Robinson have proven that there are different types of institutions that have little in common. We understand that the demand for inclusive institutions is related to high quality of human capital, but our economy does not need a high quality human capital. It just doesn't belong here. It is very successful in other economies, in Germany, in the United States, and other countries. A creative class cannot be influenced when there is no economic demand for it. So we are facing a vicious circle there. Another consideration that makes me skeptical about the reform prospects. Improving institutions should not be our motto. I can give you examples. Remember in late 1990s, we all wanted to have a law on bankruptcy, and then we were against it because it really changed the way it worked. We imported a very obvious, a very clear form which worked in other parts of the world, but it worked very differently here. Why institutions change? There are different types of organizations. There's also culture out there, and transition to innovative economy is blocked by lack of private initiative. Well, I review world experience regarding innovative economy, and things that worked in 30 or 60 countries tell me the following. There is no innovative economy in countries where they avoid uncertainty, where people have short-term orientation, where people do not have long-term vision. Where the authorities are trusted to make all decisions, and there's a low level of individualism. People tend to think collectively. Horizontal trust, social capital are other issues. there's trust only to people who are at arm's length to you. We're going to have a panel on that with some very interesting participants. If these two things are to change, then we don't need reforms, we need long-term transformation programs. There are some factors that play a role. We know how, at what rate culture may change. Today we are witnessing a great experiment, the consequences of the fall of the Berlin Wall. We see what's happening to the East Germans and West Germans. We see that they are merging. It takes 40 years. It takes at least 40 years for this movement to complete. We're talking about 2 generations. Is this a tragedy? No. We just have to think in different terms. We like to use references to Chinese experience, but we don't do it in the most appropriate fashion. China may not be an example for us. They have looked at our mistakes. They have reviewed works of Bukharin, Rykov. They have looked at what other people have done. They have looked at our past. We cannot change our past, but there are things that we can learn from China. What Deng Xiaoping did, they did not have a long-term strategy. They did not have anything but 50 years of civil war. With Deng Xiaoping, they spent 10 years in hard labor, then they wanted to see 10 years of prosperity. Deng Xiaoping succeeded in convincing the population of a huge country that in 3 generations China would become a medium-level developed European country. I think that is what we have to learn. We have to think in categories of long time periods. If we want to make frog leaps, I can tell you what will drag us back. The types of institutions that we will try to complete. Do you think there's only oil and gas rent? Not at all. We can get all kinds of rent, store radioactive waste. We can sell the Baikal lake water. This will also be natural resources rent. We can also creatively find a way to trade human capital. We can get all kinds of rate, but it does not support growth and development. That and informal institutions will drive us forward. So if we look at the situation for reforms in Russia, when were we more successful? Alexander II's reforms were comparatively successful because they were designed to take longer time. But even then, we can say that those reforms have not been sufficient. We probably know more today than they knew back then. So you are not socially determined, you are culturally determined. In fact, tomorrow I'm planning to talk about determinism as a concept. Culture has an impact. I think we should go for culturally influenced economic development. Culture like area, resources, technology is one of the factors that plays a role, but it has many unique features. I can tell you tomorrow how culture drives certain processes, where it does more and where it does less. I think we should look for socio-cultural economy, and cultural capital should be studied. We should identify, structure all kinds of bridges and bondings, things that the Higher School of Economics is so good for. Mr. Polishchuk is very good at it. Mr. Yasin has laid the foundation for many other things, and we at Moscow State University also work on the concept of socio-cultural economics, which will produce new products, not reforms, although we will see reforms and long-term transformations. In which we will see different reforms. Long-term institutions are not there, with the exception of Pillar 2 pension system. I cannot name anything that would link 1930s and the current time. That is also disappearing, being squeezed by the government tightly. So you are not an institutional determinist, and you are not yet a cultural determinism advocate. As a moderator, you can give me any label, but I think I'm not walking from one type of determinism to another type of determinism. I think I'm moving from understanding of institutions in general to informal institutions. I would rather have that label. Okay, let's say we have accepted that. The impact of cultural factors on the institutions and on the economy has never been looked at seriously before Mr. Yasin, before Semikov Robinson, before the first works of Harrison and Hutchison. I remember some very interesting workshops hosted by Mr. Yasin. Are you an advocate of cultural determinism? I don't see much difference between culture and institutions, and I can explain in a couple of words why so. These are just terms from different sciences, but they're about the same thing. We can think about it more, and then we can select the term which we like better, culture or institutions. Institutions have been invented relatively recently by the economy scholars, and culture has been around for a very long time. This brings me to think about ancient Athens, in a situation where through the community meetings they passed some draconian laws, and I could not understand draconian laws in a democratic society. We all were used to viewing ancient Athens as a democracy, and they said it's not draconian laws like a dragon. This was something that goes back to the 8th century, and in the 7th century Athens had Solon, who designed laws that later on turned out to be more important than decrees. This was an exceptional invention because nobody could reject the decisions of the People's Assembly. So it's about law. It's not about the kind of laws invented by the government officials. When the reforms have taken place, it turned out that a large chunk of the world, ancient Greece, lived under laws that were different from the laws in the states of the East that had very rigid structures which were the foundation of their culture. And the Greeks, which had a strong army of armed peasants, and all the citizens were members of the People's Assembly. That's the kind of tradition which they developed. The basics of the system have become part of the world culture. Rome has acquired a lot of that. The emperors had to make some changes in that organization, but the basics remained.
Then there was the invasion of the Germanic tribes, and then it disappeared until the 12th century. And the 12th century saw the construction of medieval Europe with cities, trade, and so on and so forth, artisans, and then some growth of another civilization which is very similar to Athens. What happens in this country? We were separated and severed from the European culture starting the 13th century when the Mongol tribes came in, the Mongol invasion, and then after some time we in fact borrowed all these habits and rights and life of the Mongols, and then we lost the Crimean War. And then there were people who were saying we need to reorder things, otherwise we'll lag behind. And then it was a manifesto on liberation of peasants from serfdom. I believe that we in the 91 were not the first. There were people under Alexander II. And I want in this building at the entry, I want to put a statue, a short, small statue, half size, not Alexander. I will speak later. There were two brothers. One was the head of the economic management department, Milutin, yes, Nikolai Milutin. Nikolai Milutin. And he exerted a lot of energy, and then he got ill. But he was not Alexander II favorite. He developed a draft of, wrote a draft of the manifesto on the abolition of serfdom, and the emperor signed it. And then there was the reform of Zemstvo, and then there was judicial reform. And you said they did not work well? Yeah. It was said already in this discussion that it starts well, everybody has hopes, and then it goes into oblivion. And that was the case at that time. And here I can say you this. Lenin had this false idea. And they were very much excited and enthusiastic about Marx's theory, because that market perspective going back to Athens was blossoming. There were epochs and stages when protectionism was in place and large corporations were built. But that was specific to specific periods. It produced certain cultural phenomena, but after that, the world saw certain changes and turns. I can tell you when we were defeated, we had suffered this defeat in 1998. I was in blues, and I had this impression that my life was wasted. So I did so much to fulfill myself, to show what I can do. Everything was lost. But the more I observed what happened, and the more contradictions and conflicts I saw in what was happening in Russia, and the more I was convinced that we have won. It does not, this process does not end within your lifetime. The people who started, it's a major cultural transformation. One has to remember the traditions Russia was guided by for 1,000 years. How do you get rid of that? Now we are observing this anniversary, and I've been thinking for quite a while, and my conclusion, so we have not lost. I'm older than you are, and I feel I have lived to be a happy man. I was happy like Zemin in 1990s. I feel happy now, not because I'm so perfect or the production is at a good level or the production slump is there and the inflation rate is high, but I'm happy. Why? Because in the past I had this idea that we will follow the path of non-Greek civilizations. We will not follow this trajectory of progress that will have an empire in place. That was the case during many centuries of human history. But then I said no. The Industrial Revolution started in 1800 and there was no stopping it in those countries where it succeeded. You say that. There was, in Europe, they have a decreasing population and they need some qualitative change unless the Chinese attack. I'm not speaking as a scholar now. It will never happen because the European culture is more viable because it has competition inherently. And instead of competition, China has harmony. And they've had it for 2,500 years. If they had, even if they want to have competition, they want to have it based on the order of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China. I may be wrong. Let's live and see. I'm deeply convinced that when we had this crisis of 2008, and then suddenly, out of the blue, and then we had this high oil prices, and then the oil's prices slumped, and we need to go back to construction of a market economy. It's not as simple as we might believe it to be, but what we did is working. And I remember I started, you remember about this shopping experience, so much for what I had to say. Thank you. Yeah, we need to move to a close. We're running out of time. We have an independent observer, Andrei Nechayev, a person who has kept silent, although he had something to say. I have a provocative question to Nechayev. Evgeny Yasev says he's happy. Are you happy, Andrei? Yeah, it's an emotional kind of way. If I live to be Evgeny's age, I will also feel I'm kind of happy. Now I place greater demands, stricter demands to the people around me, and I'm much less tolerant. I have many complaints about what I see today and what it is not congruent to my vision of 25 years back when this whole story of reforms began. And there are many deep-going reasons for my displeasure, and there are more superficial. Let me tell you about one. It became of a sort of a term, a catchword in propaganda or in daily life, and illiberal as a curse, as a pejorative word. Our good friend Auzan is now saying he's not. No, I'm an anarchist. I'm a slightly different system of values. I don't want to defend liberalism at large or specific liberals. The only thing I can say is this. To my regret and deep regret, that's talking about happiness, in the kind of policy that our opponents and quite neutral people, when they call liberal policy, like today's economic policy, an economic policy pursued 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and to my regret, it has nothing to do with liberalism. And why should not confuse personal views of some members of the government, some top managers of large companies are involved in this way or another in the management of politicians involved in governance. Do not confuse it with the overall policy being pursued. It is the first time that I had the floor, and this question about happiness allows me to speak about anything, any topic. Let me in 2 words say why the current policy pursued by the Russian government has nothing to do with is liberal policy. Some basics of liberalism, like Auzan is teaching at SU, is minimizing the role of the state, particularly as economic agency, not as a regulator. In the past 15 years, we have moved, but in the quite a long way, but in the opposite direction. Jakub Urinson said 50%, I know estimates of 70% of GDP, which is produced by state-run or companies controlled by state-run companies. It's suppression, absolute suppression of competition. And one can hardly imagine that a large, large private company can compete with a government-owned company if they play in the same field, because its board of directors are the ones that set the rules of the game. If they are responsible people and they are there in that company to develop that company, and they will have to create more favorable conditions for the state-run company, and that happens irrespective of whose friends manage the top managers of this company. The second basic tenet of liberalism is low taxes and security of the taxpayer. Russia has everything but this. We are proud of the flat tax rate, individual income tax rate, and pretty low, but that exhausts all of its accomplishments. But if you look not only at the tax rates, but the taxable base, the effective tax rate is much higher than the continental Europe or Anglo-Saxon tax rate, effective tax rate. It's a kind of spurious accomplishment with regard to liberal tax rates. So much is being said recently I'm not watching television, but then I switched on television set and saw Alexander Lowe's son, and with these 5 minutes, Alexander son was praising the Russian tax system. No, I was talking about the administration, tax administration. Tax administration has improved with the poor tax system. It may have improved, but from what perspective are you looking at this? If you are looking at this from the point of view of tax collection, potential tax, and suppression of businesses, it has improved. From the point of view of business practitioner, it's terrible, it's horrendous. You pick the word. Again, let alone the accounts can be blocked and arrested. It's equal to blocking business operation extrajudicially and without even prosecution involved or proving. And the peak of that is the right of the investigative committee to launch criminal investigations without the voice and opinion of the tax inspectorate. And Chishkin said the production function is a big pile of shit and statistics, and then the production function, the flower on the top. And so here it is the right of, the peak of this pile is the right of investigative committee without the opinion of the tax inspector. It's a pretty painful subject that makes me unhappy, and I can cite dozens of other cases and examples showing that the current economic policy has nothing to do to what most of us understand to be a liberal economic policy. And this causes extra pessimism with regard to reforms that Yakov Yurin's son was speaking about, the must-do list. I do not see an agent that can seriously undertake this. And this rear fighting and the rear being in the government and the background, I think their internal goal is not to let others do a lot of silly things, which is a noble task or the principle of small endeavors and projects. But from the point of view of moving to the future, from the point of view of structural and socio-cultural reform, Lord forbid. I do not see the subject that will undertake this and accomplish this. We were going to give time for questions. We will not give any. In keeping with the best democratic traditions, we'll be coming to a close because time is running out. There will be no discussion. We have formulated 3 questions.
The outcomes of the market economy formation and the prospects of the development. I have heard the following. The market economy has been formed. In Russia, I have also heard people say that privatization has helped us to avoid a civil war, and I have also heard that the most important thing today with the negative environment, we should launch liberal market reforms. It makes logical sense. I have not been given the floor, so I cannot make my presentation and share my vision. So I will just say one thing. I am lacking something very strongly in everything that I have heard. I am lacking the following. You have said reasonable things, and there's a colossal experience behind what you said, but this is a look from inside a liberal position. out. This is a statement for the rest of the world. I would like to throw a look from the outside looking in. This is a look that has not been thrown so far. Until now, in a serious way, we haven't done it. What I would like to hear, see, and understand for myself, I would like to understand a quite calm systemic analysis of the mistakes we have made. I do not know of any works of our colleagues that have calmly, in a systemic way, not like talking to my friend Mr. Zyganov, not like having a discussion with Vladimir Zhirinovsky, but I don't know of any systemic analysis of our mistakes, and I'm really missing it, including the analysis of the work done for privatization. I think it's very relevant and essential. Second of all, I think, although it may sound odd, but I am missing Russian liberalism. I think what we have accomplished seriously in 1990s, we have brought liberalism to Russia, but we have not succeeded in creating Russian liberalism. These are completely different tasks. Russian liberalism, I think, has not been created. We don't have it. We have fundamental, universal liberal values which we try to apply to Russian reality, just like Stolypin did and Kosygin did in due times. And we have seen gears stripping teeth, turning or getting stuck, and that's exactly because of that. This is my personal view, and I may be wrong, but now that I have been invited, I must say that I strongly miss Russian liberalism. I can tell you that the most important task for liberals is to create Russian liberalism. I don't know it. We don't have it today, and to create it, we need in-depth consideration and research of cultural, ethnic, I stress that ethnic, confessional traits of Russian people and Russia in general. Russian people is not the same thing as the Ukrainian people or Jewish people or Belarusian people. I'm saying awful things. Everybody is silent. But this is exactly what we're going to have to admit. And once we've admitted that, based on that, we would have to once again look at the history of Russian liberalism and its prospects, its future. This is my personal opinion. Now that I finally had an opportunity to share my view. I want to say thank you to all panelists. I have made many notes. I have covered half of my notebook, especially when Yakov Moisevich has been giving his presentation, although I don't think this is the end of a conversation about the outcomes of 25 years of reform. This is only the beginning. Thank you very much for your patience. Thank you very much for participation. Thank you, Anatoly Borisovich. Thank you for your modesty.